Good morning, everyone, and welcome to From Climate Anxiety to Community Action. My name is Pascal Speck, and I'm the organizer of this event for Swissnex in San Francisco. It has been very meaningful to organize this event with this topic in particular. As you may know, Swissnex, I think the clicker. As you may know, Swissnex is the innovation outpost of Switzerland. We're part of Switzerland's global network for science, education, innovation, and the arts. And today we're celebrating the Keep It Cool exhibition that won the Swiss National Science Foundation Agora Prize from FocusTerra at ETH Zurich. We have one part of that award-winning exhibition in our space to your back. So later when we have the networking, you're all invited to have a look and try out the game yourself. We're also going to hear from FocusTerra themselves more about what their exhibition entails in detail. So for today, for this event during SF Climate Week, we decided to focus on the psychological and emotional aspects of the climate crisis. We want to see today how we can move from feelings of grief, anxiety, and overwhelm towards more connection and collective action. I'm very grateful to have a wonderful group of speakers from different disciplines here today in person as well as online. As I just mentioned, FocusTerra is joining from Switzerland. And I'm actually quite hopeful that today we can spark some reflection, connection, and maybe even a renewed sense of purpose. So thank you all for being here, everyone. And with that, I hand over to our wonderful moderator, Mary Ellen Hannibal, who quickly introduces this through.
I'm super happy about being here. First of all, the whole kind of big umbrella of this is this presentation of a museum exhibit about CO2. So this is kind of fabulous because we're looking at anxiety and we're looking at what's happening in the physical world and how we relate to it emotionally, and where it really comes down to it for each of us is how we embody our experience. And our bodies, we know, are also our minds. Like all this neuroscience is telling us that your brain is basically your whole body. So we got to pay much more attention to our bodies in a very direct way. So we're going to try to integrate. This is really hard for us. We've separated those things, our minds and our bodies, for a long time in Western culture. And we're trying very kind of awkwardly to try to find a way to reintegrate. We got to do it. One way in, you know, when Pascal said grief, I'm not sure we should move so fast beyond grief. I think maybe grief is a great place to touch down sometimes and really feel the feelings. Grief is something you don't have in your head. You have it in your body. And you can't rush it if you've ever had grief. Also, by the time you are my age, you will be in grief from not moving enough and from having very stiff muscles that will not move anymore unless you spend hours coaxing them. So take my advice, please move around a lot more during the day now that you're young, and you will be in better shape when you are my age. And to that end, our person who's really the embodiment expert here is going to lead us. And I'm going to just read the names of the people who are presenting to you today because I don't want to get it wrong, and I will probably mispronounce their names. Dr. Ulrike, is that right, Pascal? Ulrike Kastrup, who's the director of FocusTerra, and who is there that person is. Hello, Dr. Kastrup.
Good morning, San Francisco.
And we're really looking forward to your presentation about CO2 and learning all about that. Then we have Simona Meiler, and Simona is a postdoc over at Stanford in the Civil and Engineering Department, which is so gangster to me, an English major. And she is going to share with us some of the climate and risk modeling that these kind of scientists do. So there we're going to go straight into the head, but remember that engineering is all about the built world, where things are actually happening. And that is not only the human-built world, but the built world of nature. And then we have Henna Hundal, also from Stanford, who is going to talk about the emotional toll of a changing planet. And we can all relate to that. Then we will have a Q&A. Is that right? No, a panel discussion, and then a Q&A. So all the way through this whole morning, there are index cards at in your seats or at the edge of the row. Please write down any questions that you have. We're going to be collecting those and addressing, sort of dealing with the Q&A that way. Like I'll take the index cards. That way it'll allow me to kind of consolidate when people have sort of the same question. And then Dominique Cowling, who is a healer and a movement person of many dimensions, is going to give us a bigger kind of embodied exercise about coping with just your feelings and your body. But we just had a little conference, and Dominique is going to call us to some movement all along in the morning. So let's just be game. Nobody's looking at you. Just look at yourself, or don't look anywhere. Okay, that's it. Let's go. Thank you.
Again, good morning, everybody in San Francisco. I'm Ulrike. I'm the director of FocusTerra, and I'm very excited that I have the opportunity today to present our exhibition and the ideas behind it to you. And of course, it's a great event for us that you in San Francisco already have a little preview of the exhibition, which will start in August in Switzerland. And later I will say a few words about it, and then you have the opportunity to experience it personally. So our exhibition is organized by us at FocusTerra, which is at the Polytechnical University in Zurich. And FocusTerra is the Earth and Science Discovery Center at ETH. So it's kind of the outreach, the science center of ETH, where we, with various activities, bridge the gap between science and the public. And one way of doing it is through special exhibitions. On the left-hand side, you see our picture of our former exhibition, which was on waves in our world. And on the right-hand side, this is a permanent exhibition tower of FocusTerra. So why an exhibition on CO2? It's actually called Keep It Cool, Tech to the Rescue, ? So is technology really the answer to our problems? And our main problem is that in Switzerland and all around in the world, we must reduce CO2 emissions across all sectors, and we have to do it now. And however, the public understanding of CO2 and the impact, especially on our health, and the challenges of the solutions that we have at hand right now are very limited. At the same time, we observe an increasing climate crisis and growing climate anxiety, especially amongst young people. And the prevailing narrative is often ominous, so where there's little room for hope. The question is, can we change this? And this will be, of course, also a topic of today. So with whom and for whom are we doing this exhibition? The exhibition is realized with many people. We have many scientists from ETH, from different fields. We have collaborators, individuals from industry, from the administration, and we all join together forces to raise awareness and to promote the understanding of the role of CO2 in the climate crisis and for our health. The audience is very general public, but we have a special focus on children and teens. We have many school classes coming to us. And of course, this is where we also like to leave a big impact. The expected visitors are around 100,000 in Zurich and at other national and international venues where the exhibition will travel to. And today it starts with the first visitor, so you're the first 100 people to show at least part of the exhibition. Our aim is we would like, with various means like interactive exhibits, as you see one here on the picture, illustrations, models, experiments and animations, demystify CO2 and explain why it's relevant in our daily life. We would like to show potential solutions to mitigate excessive CO2 emissions and climate change. We would like to empower our audience to be part of the solution and we would like to foster hope for a sustainable future if we act now with each other and for each other. Hope that was too fast. So the concept is about informing what is CO2 and what role it plays in keeping everything in balance. We would like to sensitize why we are in need to protect our planet. What is it that is at stake? We would like to engage people. How can we address CO2 with technologies in nature, but also in industry? And what are their potentials and challenges? And then we would like to call for action, how we can all act now together as an individual, as a society, and also on a political level. Now we go already to the exhibition that you see in San Francisco. On the left-hand side, this is our key visual, and we're going to present a little bit the content of the exhibition as I did just to you now, as well as our team. And one part of the exhibition will be an introduction, basic what is CO2, so CO2 in a nutshell, so that we get an understanding of the molecule, but also then what is temperature, weather and climate. So all these topics that are at the base of it when we start discussing about the climate. We present the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle is all the passes that CO2 is taking in nature, whether in the ocean, subsurface, in the atmosphere, on land, how it kind of moves through all the different reservoirs, going through plants and animals. And especially today, the issue, of course, is that we take a lot of CO2 or carbon out of the subsurface when taking out all these fossil fuels. We burn it and pump it into an atmosphere that can accommodate a lot of CO2. However, with every CO2 that is going into the atmosphere, a further warming will happen. So this is what we have to avoid and stop. Then we're going to focus on in your exhibition also on nature. Nature is actually our best ally, a very important ally. It's nature that when we leave it alone and when it's in balance, that is making sure that all the CO2 that is too much in the atmosphere is coming out. However, we are hampering with nature, and we need to support nature. We need to restore it more. We need to keep it healthy. And we also have to look out of the role of nature in an urban environment as well as in agriculture. We have an interactive exhibit that Kerstin, my colleague, who will also later be part of the panel, is quickly introducing to you because she had a major part in developing this exhibit. Kerstin?
So hi everyone from my side. Yeah, so this is the exhibit that you're actually going to see later on behind you and that you are going to be able to play. It's a gamified way of exploring how CO2 or how much CO2 is stored in different ecosystems around the world. And you can try to conserve the ecosystems to keep the stored CO2, well, the currently stored CO2 in there, and you can try to restore these ecosystems to fill them up with more CO2 and explore how much CO2 can actually be stored in them. And your goal is to basically remove CO2 from the atmosphere as much as humans have emitted so far, so about 1,100 gigatons. And I challenge you to try to get it out of the atmosphere later on. And I also want to say that this exhibit is also one great example of how we developed this exhibition. It's a huge collaboration between different partners. We have a lot of data scientists and programmers and IT experts from ETH, also illustrators. And we partnered up with the University of Arts in Zurich with a lot of different interaction design students and their mentors. We all came together, and this is basically the product of, well, almost 3 years, I think, of us coming together and joining forces and producing this wonderful exhibit that hopefully you will like as much as we do.
Thank you very much, Kerstin. It's really amazing. So much work and time went into this exhibit. This is almost an exhibition in itself, I like to say. Thank you for all your great work, Kerstin. So, and one last topic that you will see in the exhibition is on health. So with rising CO2 in the atmosphere, it's going to get warmer and warmer on Earth. So this has an effect on us. You might already experience it in San Francisco. I certainly feel it in Zurich because Switzerland is getting hotter by twice the rate as the global average. So we are already at 2.9, that we are warmer than like in 1850. And so that's pretty warm. And so what is it that we can do to stay healthy during a heat wave? How can we protect ourselves, but how can we also help to protect others? And also there is a discussion on what it actually means it gets hotter and hotter, because if it gets hotter and hotter, more and more water will evaporate, so it's going to get more and more humid. And then there's actually also a physical level at which we can't survive anymore outside without external cooling, because the amount of humidity and temperature is too high so that the body can't sweat anymore to regulate. It's a bit like a runaway fever. So we don't want to meet these temperatures, and also humidity degrees. But we already do in some parts in the world, but we certainly don't want it to become more abundant. So yeah, so here you see another photo of our team. We are 5 women plus many collaborators, and on the bottom you see our students. We work together with students from ETH, but also from the University of Zurich, who are kind of the face of FocusTerra, because they're out there to give all the tours and workshops, and it's a great way of also for them to get to know science communication and learn to communicate with a broad audience. So thank you very much, and enjoy our day or our morning together.
So welcome also from my side. My name is Simona Meiler. I'm a postdoc at Stanford, and I'm the weather and climate risk modeler here in this audience. So I think what you'll hear from me is much more natural science focused and not as much anxiety focused, but I hope that I can still provide some of the insights into my work and also kind of the problems and questions that we have in my field of research. So, I want to start this presentation with the star of the exhibit, Keep It Cool, that Ulrike just presented, which is CO2. And here you see the Keeling curve, which is a continuous measurement of CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere that has been recorded since 1958 in Hawaii on the Mauna Loa Observatory. And the latest reading of CO2 concentration is 430 parts per million. And this is roughly, or it's more than 100 parts per million increase since this measurement started. So this is quite significant, as we all know. And then the consequence is that with the increase in CO2 in the atmosphere, we also have an increase in temperature. So on this graph, you see, again, the CO2 concentration in gray, and then in parallel, and especially on the right-hand side in red, the ongoing global mean surface temperature increase. So these are really examples of we're talking about a shift in mean and in global mean surface temperatures that change, but whenever you have a shift in mean, you also have a change in the distribution that affects the extremes, and this is what you see on the red part on your right, where we're seeing more extreme temperatures, and we also see extreme temperatures that are outside the range of what would have been possible in the original distribution. And these extreme events are my research focus, so I don't only look at extreme temperature, but I look at extreme weather events more generally. And a good example or a good illustration for the kind of topics that I look into in my research is this image, which shows the destruction of Hurricane Otis that was brought to Acapulco in Mexico in fall of 2023. So as a Western climate risk researcher, I'm interested in, first of all, understanding the physical force of this hurricane, but then also how it interacts with the exposed population and socioeconomic systems. And in addition to that, I usually have questions of how such extreme weather events change in the future, and then also what this means for whatever and whoever is in harm's way. My kind of like the core tool that I use in my research are climate risk models, and these climate risk models follow the IPCC's definition of risk as the interplay of hazard, or here weather and climate events, exposure and vulnerability. And combining these three key elements then allows us to derive metrics and like measure or predictions that can be used to inform disaster risk management or climate adaptation measures. And this is really the bread and butter of my research. I'll show you two examples of what it means to do research in this field concretely. So going back to the example of Hurricane Otis, a challenge that we often have is that we have very few records of such extreme events because they're rare by definition. So if you look at the region of Mexico and Acapulco, you see that since the 1950s, when the records have started, we only saw like 8 tropical cyclones that made landfall in the area. So we're lacking a sample of events that would be needed for some sort of statistics. Now, the solution comes in the form of synthetic tropical cyclone model output. And this is data that is generated by climate scientists who found ways to generate synthetic sets which just represent a much denser representation of these storms, covering multiple thousands of years worth of data. And they have all been somewhat validated as kind of like representing climatology, so representing a storm strength or frequency. But these model outputs have not really been compared in such a risk assessment setting as I would do. So I took all the different modeling outputs that I had available and used them as hazard or weather and climate risk data inputs into a risk modeling framework. I then used a spatially explicit representation of asset values, and this is what you see on kind of like the world map, where I have a representation of kind of like coastal areas and the distribution of wealth in these areas. And then we use impact functions, which are a mathematical representation of vulnerability, and they basically link a relative, the hazard intensity to a relative degree of damage. And with these ingredients, I calculate direct economic damages from tropical cyclones on a global scale. Now, the output of such an analysis comes, for example, in the form of impact return period curves. And this is just one example of a quantitative type of analysis. What you see here is on results for the North Indian Ocean representing tropical cyclone impacts over kind of like the last 40 years. You see on the x-axis a frequency measure, which is a return period, and then on the y-axis, the estimated impact. And what I want you to take away from here is, for example, if you looked at the 100-year event, which is like a common metric, it's what, like the type of tropical cyclone that happens, statistically speaking, every once in 100 years, or every year with a probability of 1%, you actually see that the estimated impacts differ quite notably between hazard sets. So here we're really looking at some of the uncertainties in these climate risks that we currently don't understand. Now, kind of like moving from this type of quantitative analysis, I often gotten the question, so which hazard set should I choose for my analysis if they differ in the type of output? And I realized that I, with my research, start to have knowledge on some of the model qualities and like underlying mechanisms and representations that I'm actually in a position to provide guidance on which track set to choose depending on what type of application. So I think this is always what I try to do with my research, that I'm thinking about which of the insights I generate from my model land are generalizable also beyond something like for the real world. So this is the type of guidance I usually aim to provide out of my research. Now, as a second example, we talked about financial impact so far. You can use the exact same climate risk modeling framework to also think about more humanitarian questions. And this is what we did in the second project, where we applied a natural hazard risk modeling lens to the problem of human displacement. And the IDMC, so the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center in Geneva, is an institution that keeps a book of how many people are forced out of their homes as a consequence of disasters, so meaning as a consequence of conflict or violence, but then also as a consequence of extreme weather events. And by internal displacement, we mean the involuntary movement of people within country boundaries. So our challenge was to use these representations of extreme weather events and think about how many people are being displaced as a consequence. And we used the same risk modeling framework, now not only looking at tropical cyclones, but also including coastal floods, river floods, and droughts. And then we calculated numbers like the annual average displacement across the globe. And here is kind of like this map of where on Earth are people at risk of needing to displace after tropical cyclones, river floods, coastal floods, or droughts. And this is, again, just one example of a result that we can provide with this risk type of assessment that complements the work that the IDMC does. It can also be the starting point to then zoom in, because the data that we generate here is pretty granular. So, for example, we can look into a single country, Afghanistan, for example. You see here, I'm only showing the results for river floods. You see that on average, we calculate that every year, roughly 50,000 people are at risk of being displaced. You also can then ponder about what happens under future climate, and actually see that under future climate, Afghanistan sees fewer floods, so fewer people are at risk of being displaced. Now, I wouldn't be showing this graph if there wasn't a twist to it. And this actually comes if we look at drought risk in the same reason. And you see that roughly 100,000 people are at risk from being displaced as a consequence of drought. And this risk increases quite drastically if we look at future climate scenarios. And I think this example is, again, quite a good illustration of my field of research, because it combines this whole chain of extreme weather events down to what it means for the exposed population, how this might change on a future climate, but then also it dives into some of the regional differences that are different for all the parts of the world and the different hazards. And I think this is what I wanted to show with kind of like my talk, moving from global CO2 emissions and global mean surface temperatures to some of the locally different extreme weather events, but then also trying to use that information to think about climate adaptation and how we can build communities that are more resilient in the future. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Henna Hundal. I am a medical student at Stanford and a research fellow with the CIRCLE Initiative, which is a research and action-oriented initiative at the Department of Psychiatry, where we focus on unpacking the emotional dimensions of the climate crisis on human well-being. It's a pleasure to be with you all here today. There we go. So, a picture is worth 1,000 words, as we all very well know. And I wanted to begin with this because I think when we try to encapsulate the emotional dimensions and impact of the climate crisis, it can be very difficult to put it into words. I created this with an AI art program called Midjourney. It's free, it's available online. And I tried to capture in a portrait the visceral, visual, painful impact of the climate crisis on our psyche. When we think about the fact that heat waves are increasing in frequency, intensity, and duration. When we think about the fact that fire seasons are increasing in duration. When we think about the fact that tropical cyclones are becoming more severe, and there's predicted to be a greater proportion of tropical cyclones being category 4 and 5, which are, of course, the most destructive to our livelihoods and our well-being. How do we really get our heads around that? In 2021, my mentor at the CIRCLE Initiative, Dr. Britt Ray, published a study of 10,000 young people being surveyed across 10 countries. And in this study, 60% of them said that they felt extremely worried or very worried about climate change. More than half agreed with the statement that humanity is doomed, and nearly half said that their feelings about climate change impact their daily functioning. And so when we think about what this really looks like day to day, we can imagine a young couple wondering if their child will be able to grow up and have a chance at breathing clean air. For those of us who live in the Bay Area, we remember not too long ago when we woke up one morning and the sky was literally orange in San Francisco. It might show up as a young couple wondering if it is morally sound to bring a young child into a climate change ravaged world. That's a theme that comes up over and over. And there are a range of emotions that we can feel about the climate crisis. This emotions wheel was created by the Climate Mental Health Network, and it's based on literature about the different feelings that people emote when they think about climate change and our planet. And I wonder if anyone would feel comfortable sharing today how they might be feeling, where they would put themselves on the climate emotions wheel. Anyone willing to volunteer? Yeah, go for it. Anger. Tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, we were warned about a lot of things way back in the 60s, and we didn't need anybody's advice. We just kept going along, and here we are now.
Yeah.
I mean, they predicted this, you know, we saw it coming.
Yeah.
Stood in front of the train and just let it come.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. Yes, please.
Well, I feel anxious because
Mhm.
I live in a town where 30% of people lost their homeowners insurance last year due to wildfire risk.
Yeah.
And it's a real thing that causes huge amounts of anxiety.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Would anyone else be willing? Thank you.
I go around the wheel pretty much all day long.
As we do, as we tend to do. Absolutely. In the back.
I feel overwhelmed, especially like studying sustainable development during my undergrad and being like, oh, I only know like 1% of the problem. And I don't know, I think it's definitely like a mixture of, well, you know, it's okay that I don't have all the solutions because I'm one person,
Yeah.
but also it's just very overwhelming to be like, oh my God, there's so much I don't know. And I work so hard in studying this one tiny niche part of climate change.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing. I think we have one more here.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe we should call it the climate emotions hamster wheel, right? Because I'm sure, sure a lot of us spend time on it. I sort of just hang out on the x-axis here, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, disappointment, despair, but on the other side, gratitude and hope and a little bit of overwhelm. When I'm in a place like this, I also teach at San Francisco State. I teach climate stuff, and just having to get up and like say, I cannot walk into my classroom on that end of the x-axis, right?
Right.
And so talking to people about my hope and gratitude actually makes me feel it a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, I say that they keep me on my hope toes.
I love that.
So yeah. On the wheel or on the axis.
I love that. Any more? One there and one here too.
Thank you. One that I don't see on here, but that I've been feeling lately is resignation.
Oh.
So yeah, I've been working in the climate space for almost 10 years, and yeah, that's how I'm feeling lately.
Yeah, that's a great one. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you very much. I will give some of positivity, I would say. So I would say inspiration. I work in the energy sector, and I think that climate change is the biggest motivation, I would say, to change things. So I come from Italy, working in this sector, and I hope that this kind of things can get the right culture to change things. We can do it.
Thank you.
Hi. I often think to myself that I have rapidly oscillating manic depressive disorder. And so what'll happen is I will read something and it'll be so devastating, and I'll just think, methane holes in the Arctic, and now the Earth is letting out its own CO2. What are we going to do? It's like humans, you broke your planet. It's just done. And then I'll see some startup that has massive potential about how we're going to get carbon out of the air. We're going to put it somewhere. It's going to stay. Yeah. And I'll go, yeah, humans are like innovative. You can do this. And some big companies getting carbon credits, and they're making massive impacts. And so, and then I just go back and forth based on what's the last thing I've heard or read.
Absolutely. I think we can cycle through all these motions in any given day. I think we had one more back there.
Yeah, I definitely feeling myself on the three negative quadrants, but I feel
Yes.
on the positive quadrant.
Yeah.
Definitely sort of of the opinion that we've been perpetually doomed as humanity, and we're constantly working to escape our doom and maybe invent new dooms for ourselves. We'll find what new problems we create. Being in SF Climate Week, I'm just seeing so many seeds being planted, not just seeds, but things that are saplings and trees, and there's a lot of things growing and developing and changing, and unfortunately, to cement and sort of create change, you need crisis, and we are not only feeling the crisis, but having many people who grew up with this crisis, and this crisis is becoming core to their identity, and it's being core to their action and their purpose, so just more change now than ever, and I'm very excited to see where we go.
Absolutely. I love that analogy. I think there was a hand back there.
I've been covering the green environmental climate week for 20 plus years. I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
I interview the solutionaries, so that's where I get my inspiration and my education. That broadcast pitch background and left to do environmental news because I couldn't get my networks and news stories.
Yeah.
Realize that environmental news is the biggest stories not getting covered. So I imagine all those years. I started when my daughter was 2. I now have a granddaughter who's almost 2. So everything that I've felt that many of us have is just more acute right now. The outrage at what this government is doing, I feel like it's wiping out all my work and along with that, all the people who have toiled away, often unpaid or underpaid. We're so passionate, we care so much, and that's where I get my fuel from you all. And that's what we need to kind of amplify. Like, guess what? There are things we can do. There are so many solutions, but media in this country has refused to put that kind of programming on, so they're very frustrated. And with new baby in our lives and what's going on in Washington, I mean, last thing, I wake up every morning before I get out of bed. There are not how many newsletters I'm on and how much stuff I get. The sky is falling, and it kind of is. And then I see what's going on.
Yeah.
It's like the cognitive dissonance is off the chart, and it really should be so hard to get going every day. It's getting harder. But I have to say, the happiest people I know, and it's very counterintuitive, are the people doing this work. By happy, I mean, it's not always easy, but we were to dinner last night. Everyone is just so energized, and that's the invitation to people who are worried about it but not yet part of our movement, if you will. To join us, you'll have an instant community.
Yeah.
Great friends who will understand you and you will learn from and vice versa. And that's not hype, that's absolutely, I've gone to 250 some odd conferences over the years. 100% of the time, those are the people who are most
Yeah.
So I do think passion and purpose keeps you young, I like to think.
Yeah.
Getting a little exhausted, I'm not really up anymore. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Really appreciate it. I think we have one more hand. One more quick comment. Go ahead, please.
I'm not very proud to say that, because I agree that we should focus on the people
Mm-hmm.
that do something.
Yeah.
If you look at the numbers, and I'm not speaking about the people that just are not educated about it, but a lot of people heard about it and just decided to not care. For instance, the current administration. And so I'm in the resignation part as well.
Sure.
I'm at the point where I say, okay, then let them be doomed.
Yeah.
And this feels very bad.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I think we had one more hand back there.
I'm a broadcast meteorologist. I lost my home in Hurricane Ian, 5 feet of water.
Wow.
Going through that loss immediately is terrible.
Absolutely.
And then the subsequent lack of support through it via FEMA
Yeah.
resources, not to the detriment of the individuals working, but the lack of resources.
Yeah.
The insurance companies, the ripple impact after a major disaster for somebody like me
Yeah.
is and can be debilitating.
Absolutely.
Because you're always up against
Yeah.
If you don't know anybody that's actually been impacted direct, you probably do.
Yeah.
You will. And you never think it's going to be you.
Yeah.
When it hits.
Yeah.
Just, you know. And being in this
Absolutely.
environment here, earthquakes, all that. Anyway, be
Yeah.
prepared, is my point. Because it will hit you like a brick.
Yeah.
And the recovery time takes forever.
I'm very sorry to hear that. Thank you for sharing. You know, a lot of people mentioned their work or their education or their research as playing a part in how they emote around the climate crisis. We see that come up often. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, once said that we're living in the era of global boiling. I really like that line because I think it urges us to think about whether experiencing any of these emotions is perhaps just a natural psychological reflex to living in this time that is so detrimental to our physical safety as well as our mental health. And I think part of the work for people like me who are involved in the medical space is thinking about how do we differentiate those normal, almost expected responses to climate change from clinically significant presentations. And so I'll kind of leave you on that note. There's a lot of great work being done in this area. A lot of medical schools, including mine at Stanford, are focused on integrating climate change into preclinical education, as well as clinical training, making sure that the doctors of tomorrow are well equipped to be able to talk with patients who might, be feeling these impacts very heavy. And I think it's really important to keep thinking about this, and also to realize that in many ways, this is actually an opportunity to be our most connected, lively, resilient selves, be engaged with our emotions around the climate change, and encouraging others to do the same. Thank you all.
So I guess I'll just start with some questions that came up for me in the presentation. Thank you so much for that, though, both of you. It was really wonderfully put together. And we don't have a physical person here who's telling us, but we have a Zoom person here who's telling us about this fabulous exhibit. And the thing is that CO2 is really it's the building block of life. It's what we're all made of. And so actually having this interaction with how we get it out of the atmosphere and what it is, it does sort of pay, I think, emotionally to remember that it's also our bodies and every single thing we make and build. So it's our world. That's one of these positive things, in a way, of climate change, is that it's actually really increasing our understanding of how the Earth works, how nature works within the Earth system. So one question I have for, Simona, is these models that you make, and then you're using these extreme, so tell me if I'm experiencing this correctly. You're using these extreme weather projections and also historical occurrences to make your models. How often, and what's your process for revising the models as you go forward, both with new information from your own research and other people's research, and then with actual events?
Yeah. I think there's no strict timeline to this. I think with every new event we learn, and I think it always depends a little bit on the type of research question that you have. I think a lot of what we do is an applied form of what comes out of the classical climate sciences. So with every iteration of new climate models, which are often combined in these intercomparison cycles, so we get new information that we also can use then in these extreme event modeling. And I think we're trying to understand the risk, so kind of like the lingering risk of exposure to some of these extreme weather events. But then I think it's a different question if you're trying to forecast the immediate unfolding of an event. So we heard the example of Hurricane Ian. So this unfortunately also gave us a lot of data to improve our models, improve also understanding of processes of recovery and so on. So I think it's a continuous development. We're happy about more data, so to say, to make the models better, but then also to protect our the exposed population better.
And then just another question for you. In modeling and showing us these projections, and people are on the move now due to climate impacts. You mentioned violence and something else, lack of resources, basically. how do you put those together? The climate models that you have that are just the physical system, but then with these manifestations in governments and how people's lives are unfolding?
Yeah, that's a good and important question. And I think what we often do with models is, by definition, we simplify. So in the case of human displacement, all we did was, in a way, represent the fraction of the human displacement that is due to the extreme weather events. Of course, there are underlying drivers that make certain parts of population more susceptible for the need to move, and some of these aspects of conflict or social vulnerability are not captured in our models. And I think that's also then I would say, like, our part of the job to communicate where our model boundaries are. So what can we say with the model? What do we represent? And which bits do we leave unrepresented? And what does this then mean for the results that we derive from them?
Okay, and I'm just going to stick with you for the moment. One of the questions from the audience is, do you explore models that include potential solutions? And then, measuring perhaps the relative efficacy of solutions, and is there a timeline of solution impact?
Good questions. What we do, and what I have started doing more, is to actually work in this space of thinking about climate adaptation measures, and I think that then really is a solution. I think the simplest form can be insurance. There are other measures that maybe you think about San Francisco, and maybe the urban planners think about building a seawall for floods or something. So I think our models can inform what solutions can look like, how much they cost. They can weigh between different solutions in terms of what, like, physical area would they protect, how much would they cost. And I think there is, like, the optimal solution is probably always a question of the subjective choice and some of the normative and value-based judgments that we make. But the type of models that I use are really designed to be applied in a more solution-oriented space. I think that then is always context dependent and also requires collaborations with stakeholders in that space.
Thank you. I'll just mention to people, there's a book that was published in the last year called On the Move by Abram Lustgarten. He's a ProPublica reporter, and it's on the topic exactly of climate change impacts, where people are already moving, and then where people are likely to be moving. And it's a very well-written book. Now I'll ask Ulrike and Kerstin a burning question that I have. I, as an educator and a writer, perhaps got overexcited when I started to understand that biology, which we are, human beings, is a latecomer to the planet relatively, and that we have an Earth system that's lithosphere, atmosphere, hydrosphere, and then biosphere. And this is one of the Earth system science has developed massively recently because it had to in response to understanding climate change. And, I think people say quite often, and I know what they mean, humans are doomed, the planet is doomed. Well, the planet is actually not doomed, and neither is biology particularly. How did you draw the line at how did you define CO2, relative abiotic versus biotic in your museum display, which I'm just absolutely gobsmacked by its beauty.
I can start. So CO2 is abiotic, but of course nature uses it. No, biology uses it. No, we exhale it. Plants are taking it up, and then they're producing oxygen for us. So it's both. And to say something about maybe what is doomed. There have been mass extinctions throughout Earth's history, various, which were also partly very severe. And we are saying that we are now in a new man-made or human-made mass extinctions. So Earth will continue, also biology, everything will continue, but differently. So we will have certain species will die out, and the Earth or life on Earth will reorganize itself. But there is a major reduction right now happening to life on Earth with regard to different species and variety of animals as well. Kerstin, you want to add something?
Maybe I can just add a slightly different aspect that we are paying a lot of attention to in the exhibition. What's really important to us is the fact that we try to paint a realistic picture of CO2, because a lot of people have it, they think of CO2 as some sort of toxic, grayish smoke, poisonous, negative thing that sort of is a waste that we need to take care of, and nobody wants to deal with it. But CO2 is something natural. It's been there. It's essential for life, as you said before. And we really try to paint also a positive picture of CO2. It's nothing that's bad. It's something really, really good. What we are doing is we're changing the carbon cycle and we're bringing it out of balance, and we're trying to hopefully restore that balance.
Thank you, guys. There is a question from someone in the audience that I'm just going to give to Simona privately. I think it's a little technical for right now. So that person, you could come and talk to Simona when we have that opportunity. So let's go to Henna. I have a question that is always coming up when I hear from people who are focused on the psychology of climate change. There seems to be a presumption that the normal state for human beings is happy-go-lucky. And it is not. Humans have been on the move since we moved out of Africa. Guess what? We weren't doing that for the fun of it. And we were also terrified, more terrified perhaps than we are today, by animals and diseases and lack of resources. And we have some big mythologies that native indigenous people have always been in harmony with their world, with their nature. And they haven't been. They've moved on when they've exhausted resources and then learned, and certainly have much more involvement and knowledge of the natural world than post-colonial people. So what's your baseline for how should we feel? It seems like we're expecting ourselves to feel a certain way.
Yeah, that's a really interesting and beautiful question. I think it's very true that happy is not the expected baseline all the time. It's actually quite normal to cycle through emotions and to have appropriate responses to different environmental stressors. So as was kind of discussed earlier and bantered about, for people who perhaps study this issue very closely, and I think as was mentioned, are kind of frustrated by the current policy context, not translating their research findings appropriately, holding a level of anger or frustration around that would perhaps be an appropriate reaction. On the other hand, we know that research has demonstrated that collective behaviors help reduce the social and cognitive burden of climate anxiety. So actually engaging with others on climate action can be a really effective tool. We also see the advent of things like climate cafes, which are not considered therapy, but they are convenings of people with the help of a trained facilitator who can talk through their emotions around climate change and are safe spaces. And a lot of people find them to be very renewing and healing. And so I think there's no correct way to feel about climate change. And it's very expected that we would hold some degree of worry. Perhaps that's just a sign that we're paying attention. I think from a medical perspective, where we get concerned is when that bleeds over into impacting daily functioning. So we're seeing young people report that, as I mentioned, that study of 10,000 young people across 10 countries, when you have just under half saying that their feelings around climate change are impacting their daily functioning, that's when it becomes a little bit concerning. And then we also know that it can exacerbate pre-existing mental health conditions. So that's another aspect to think about.
Thank you. I'm hoping that those children will say, I do feel this, and it motivates me. I want to really acknowledge the people who shared some traumatic experiences of losing insurance, losing a home to fire. I have a brother who lives in Asheville, North Carolina, who lived through Helene, and he lost, tremendous amount of property, but he was fine. And he's, that was last September. He's still traumatized by it, and I've been very kind of like, well, dude, you didn't have your sky blacken like I've lived through. You haven't lived through your house burning down like, my brother-in-law did. You're okay. And I've been nicer to him than that. I have restrained my older sister, but he's actually really feeling it, so you got to just really be real with that. And it has made me understand that people have trauma. They lose things, and their lives are upended. And I wonder about the bringing of really addressing trauma into the climate emotion discussion a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think about when Hurricane Milton was barreling toward Florida last year. There was a famous meteorologist in Florida who was doing a report, and a video actually went viral of him breaking down mid-report, and he said something to the effect of, "I apologize, this is just horrific." We know, for example, there's a case report published in the medical literature about a young woman with a pre-existing eating disorder who became so consumed by the climate crisis, thoughts around it, and wanting to avoid all carbon-intensive foods that it exacerbated the challenges she was dealing with. So we really do bring a different set of pre-existing trauma to these issues that can be, in turn, fueled more by the impacts that we feel from climate change. And then the climate change impacts themselves can be the genesis of that trauma too. So I think it's important to acknowledge both.
Thank you so much. I think we're moving on now to the next part of our presentation, which is me, I think, just telling you. Oops, here's another question. For you guys, Ulrike and Kerstin, what approach are you using to inform and sensitize children without frightening them? Good question.
Kerstin.
Yeah, okay. So should I go first? Okay. All right. Well, we try to have a lot of interactive exhibits where they can, in a gamified way, also in a fun way, learn or experience and have like a positive experience with any kind of topic in the exhibition that might sound really negative if I were to tell it to you right now. So we're trying to do that. Plus, we also try to do it with interaction, of course. We design workshops, we design tours. We have a guide in attendance that will be present in the exhibition and also take care of any questions and lead people through the exhibition. So human contact as well that can adapt to the level of children. Children are usually very great. They have a lot of great questions. They're genuinely interested in a topic. So we try to answer them very honestly and on a level that is understandable for children or any different ages and school levels that visit us. Yeah. Uli, do you want to add something?
Well, we also had some tests of the table that you see in the exhibition in San Francisco as well. We had school classes coming in. We wanted to see whether they understand it, whether they like it, and they were very excited about it because, as Kerstin before presented, it's about how to get CO2 out of the atmosphere back into the Earth systems. So if they interact with it in a gamified way, that's maybe probably also more positive. In general, I have to say it's always the question, are we presenting what's actually happening, or are we trying to be more hiding in what is happening to us? And we decided to be clear about the tipping points and planetary boundaries we are about to reach. And so because if you want to live better, which is right now not being stopped, you need to understand what is happening, because only if you understand what is happening, you can take the right measures to counter it in terms of physical adaptation, no, against fires, heat waves, and so on, but also with regard to the psychological impacts. And if you don't know what's happening, you will be unprepared, and that's not good. So it's important to be clear, to understand what's happening, so that you can then act in a way to minimize the consequences as much as possible.
Also, maybe I can also add one more thing. We're also trying to, like, especially for older school children that might have to make a career choice fairly soon in their lives, we're also trying to point out that there are different options for jobs. For example, also that when you meet a scientist in one of our programs, you know, what science like, also personal stories of that scientist, that they might want to become a scientist themselves to try and solve the problem, to bring in their ideas. Or they might want to become a lawyer, because that's also needed for example, technological solutions where you put CO2 in the subsurface. Who owns that subsurface? What happens if it leaks? So we're trying to point out different options, and that there's options for everyone to work on solutions and get the solutions going.
Okay, thank you both so much. We're going to wrap up this part of the presentation today and move on to the next part. So we'll move on to the next slides. We have another question here about to what extent are you helping people create mindsets and strategies to cope with uncertainty and change and to boost mental resilience, which is a great question. I'm going to respond to that myself with I have 2 slides. So this is coming right up this weekend, is the weekend of April 25th to 28th, is something called City Nature Challenge. And this is a project of the California Academy of Sciences and the Los Angeles Museum of Natural History. It's been going for 10 years. Cities around the globe are competing to see which city can get the most observations on iNaturalist of biodiversity and the most number of species. This is a fantastic, positive, incredible program that you can contribute to this weekend. You can even start right now today. Feel free to just put iNaturalist on your phone right now. Why not? I suggest if you don't have an iNaturalist account that you put it on, that you sign up for it actually on a desktop or a laptop first, and then put the app on your phone. To the person who was angry, with good reason, that we've known about this train coming a long time and have done nothing, thank you for that. But things really do change. In about 2017, I think, I published a book about citizen science called Citizen Scientist, Searching for Heroes and Hope in an Age of Extinction. And when I was researching this book, I was embedded at the California Academy of Sciences, where they were developing their citizen science program. So it was brand new then, but I had noticed that this was something cropping up all over the place around the country and around the world. So citizen science, sometimes called community science, is an incredible intersection of community action, technology, and concrete actionable outcomes. You can do this to help nature and all sorts of other things, and you can do it now today, and you can do it every day. So this, to me, not only are we modeling what species live where, and how those species distributions are changing, but we're also creating people that can be active without joining a cause or creating, choosing a blue or a red banner to fly above their head. Anybody can do this without declaring all sorts of emotional, political, and psychological identities. It is a tremendous potential and is being used to increase social justice issues, especially around the environment also. So you want to do this weekend, any observations you make, San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, Palo Alto, all participating in this. I think the UN should give City Nature Challenge an award. has there ever been a unified global project on behalf of nature where the entire globe is cooperating over and over again every year in City Nature Challenge? Then the really fun stuff starts when you get hooked on this for Snapshot Cal Coast. This is a project of mostly the Cal Academy, but also the Ocean Protection Council. And this gets a little bit more into the proverbial weeds of biology and how we really understand ecosystems and geographies. So this is more bounded. It is the whole coast of California, essentially, and hundreds of nonprofits and agencies and schools have been participating in this. So we're getting a super granular look at how biodiversity is changing on the coasts. And the coasts are really an intersection of every kind of economy and group of people, very wealthy people, very under-resourced people living on coasts. So participate in Snapshot Cal Coast. Go on the California Academy of their website to see when they're going to the tide pool in Pillar Point, and go with them because it's so fun. You'll have a psychedelic physical experience in the tide pool. And with that note, I'm going to turn it over to Dominique to help us embody all of the above. Thank you.